Activity Index up 2% on July 2019. There are, of course, no costless decisions in confronting a crisis such as this. Cushioning the blow from COVID-19 meant we had to borrow money to support 1.7 million of our workers through lockdown through the wage subsidy, and the other significant initiatives that we have undertaken to support businesses and households. But New Zealand did go into this crisis in a strong economic and fiscal position. In particular, our low level of public debt has meant that despite having to borrow more, our overall debt is still much lower than most other countries. What is needed now is certainty and stability. A plan and a policy that will get the balance right, keeping a lid on debt and supporting our recovery, including protecting essential services like health and education. We have already outlined our 5-point economic plan to sustainably grow our economy and create high-wage jobs. This is focused on investing in skills, job creation, supporting small businesses, taking international opportunities and future-proofing our economy. Today, Stuart Nash and I will outline our revenue policy to support this work. Our plan stands in contrast to a chaotic and desperate National Party who are simultaneously promising large, uncosted policies and talking about a debt target that will require $80 billion of cuts to essential services like health and education. New Zealanders deserve better than that, and our plan today provides the continuity and certainty that is needed. So today I am announcing that the next Labour government will introduce a new top tax rate of 39% for the 2% of people who earn more than $180,000. The new rate will only have to be paid on any income earned more than $180,000, so this will only affect the top 2% of earners. For 98% of people, there won't be any change. It's important to remember too that this is for individual income. So if a couple earn together more than $180,000 but individually earn less than that amount, there is no change at all to the amount that they will have to pay. It is also important to remember that the new rate only applies to the part of a person's income that is over $180,000. So, for example, if you earn exactly $180,000, you will not pay any more tax. The new rate kicks in at the same income as Australia's top tax threshold of Australian $180,000. But Australians earning over this threshold pay a much higher rate, 47%, including their 2% Medicare levy. This policy is about everyone pitching in to do their bit to help our country rebuild, to protect the vital public services we all need, and to keep our debt under control as we continue our fight against this virus and drive our recovery. It's also about providing certainty and stability. Labour will not implement any new taxes or make any further increases to income tax next term. We've already said that there will be no increase to petrol excise during the next term. Other existing levies and duties such as ACC, alcohol and tobacco will be adjusted as appropriate per normal practice through the annual budget process. We are also making sure that Kiwi businesses are operating on a level playing field by closing tax loopholes so multinational corporations pay their fair share. This policy balances Labour's focus on keeping debt under control while investing in important services like health and education. Getting that balance right is critical as we continue to manage the impacts of COVID-19 and invest in our recovery. My challenge today to the National Party is for them to front up about what their plan really is. With 3 leaders since COVID began, it has been hard to get a handle on exactly what they will do. There is no free lunch here. National's on-again, off-again debt target can only be achieved by massive cuts to public services. Their uncosted policies are piling up. It's a shambles, it doesn't add up, and they represent a risk to New Zealand's fight against and recovery from COVID-19. Our team of 5 million is doing an outstanding job in the fight against COVID-19. It's important now that we all play our part as we recover and rebuild. I'll now hand over to Stuart Nash for a few remarks and then we'll take your questions.
Thank you, Grant. Look, I just want to start by saying that I've been working closely with Grant Robertson and government for 3 years now. And I know how seriously he takes his responsibilities around fiscal prudence and accountability. This tax policy is not only fair, but is extremely fiscally responsible and prudent given the extraordinary times we now find ourselves in. In fact, the last time Grant Robertson and I stood before the media to make a tax-related announcement, it seems like a lifetime ago. It was 18 months ago, pre-COVID, when the Tax Working Group issued its final report. In the tax space, the hallmark of a Labour government has been balance, fairness, and responsive to new concerns about inequality when they arise. For example, in the business sector, the Tax Working Group looked at a number of options for tax reform that could enhance productivity and boost investment. These included measures such as changes to loss continuity rules, an extension of the black hole deductions, building depreciation deductions, and concessions for nationally significant infrastructure projects. In government, we progressed all these reforms. We also held multinationals to account and passed the Base Erosion Profit Shifting, or BEPS legislation, and we also legislated for GST on online goods. These were reforms the business community had been seeking for years, but got nowhere under previous administrations. Labour is committed to keeping the tax system simple and fair. That is what this policy does. Thank you.
How categorical can you be when you say no new taxes and no further increases?
Well, that's Labour's policy. What we've announced today is the extent of our revenue policy. We believe now is the right time to put forward a policy that is simple, clear and gives certainty.
So when you look at Australia's example of 47%, did you look at the possibility and the options of going higher than 39%?
No, we didn't. We were very clear that, and obviously a previous Labor government had moved the top rate to 39 cents as well. We were very clear that that struck the right balance. I mean, it is important to make sure that the system remains simple and clear, and we thought that 39 cents for the top 2% was the best outcome. Bear in mind, under this policy, for 98% of New Zealanders, there is no change.
Why aren't you doing bold enough to add? Are you also ruling out then, when you say no new taxes, if you form a coalition with another party not adopting any of their tax policy?
Well, this is our tax policy, and that's what we're putting out, and we are saying that we will not be implementing any new taxes or any other additions to income tax this term.
So the rest of the Greens policies are off the table if you form.
The Greens policies are up to the Greens policies are up to the Green. What I am saying is that our tax policy is that Labor will not implement any new taxes beyond what's on the paper here or any increases in income tax.
Why aren't you being bold enough to look at taxing assets and capital? I understand the CGT argument, but you're just leaving that, and that's one major driver of inequality at the moment.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister has been very clear about the fact that we would not be proposing a capital gains tax. We want to make sure that at this time we provide stability and certainty for New Zealanders. We are working very hard on making sure we build more houses, making sure we increase opportunities for New Zealanders to own their own homes. But now, for us, we are putting forward a tax policy that means that for 98% of New Zealanders, there's no change.
Isn't that really just burying your head in the sand over such, something that was obviously highlighted in the Tax Working Group report is said as a major driver of inequality in the tax system, and you're not addressing it in any way, even in another way from CGT.
Yeah, and so again, we want stability here. We want New Zealanders to be confident about what's going to happen over the next 3 years. For 98% of them, there will be no change here. We will continue to make sure that we deal with issues, particularly in the housing market, make sure that we're building more houses, make sure we're providing more opportunities for New Zealanders to own their own home through things like progressive home ownership. But in terms of this revenue policy, at this time, as we rebuild and recover from COVID-19, we believe this is the right balance.
What's the timeline of this? So how long after, if you are re-elected, will this be put in place?
So the aim is for this to come in for the tax year that will start in April next year, and so we'll look to legislate. It's a very simple fix, so from a legislative point of view, it's very easy to do.
So it just goes through the House? So.
Yeah.
Why did you set it at $180,000? Why not the likes of 150 grand and MPs earn 160 as a minimum salary? Why are they not budget?
Well, we wanted to get the balance right here. We're talking about the top 2% of earners. So for 98% of people, no difference whatsoever. And we believe that that's the appropriate balance to strike at this time. Obviously, it generates a reasonable amount of revenue for the government to be able to use in terms of our vital public services and keeping debt under control. And so we chose that rate because we thought it struck the right balance.
It's not really a reasonable amount of revenue when you're borrowing $50 billion, though, is it?
Well,
it's kind of a bit tokenistic.
It all counts, I can assure you of that, and a couple of $1 billion across the forecast period will make a difference to protecting those services. But it's also worth bearing in mind, as I said, there is no costless decision or free lunch here. If parties are going to be proposing new initiatives and new policies and also trying to keep debt under control, they need to be able to explain how they're funding that, and that's what this plan does today.
Did you seriously consider putting the threshold at 150?
Not particularly, no. The Labor Party has a process for setting its policy that's driven by members and comes through our policy committees and policy council to our caucus, and these were the numbers that we've been thinking about.
You're saying that everyone's been asked to put in to do their bit, pitch in and do their bit. We've learned in recent days that with the wage subsidy, some of the richest New Zealanders have become richer. Based off the $550 million you're expecting this to bring in, it would take these new top tax earners about 25 years to pay back the wage subsidy. Are some people being asked to do a little less than their bit?
I don't think so. I mean, the point of the wage subsidy was to retain people in their jobs, and there is no counterfactual to what would have happened if we hadn't put that in place. I don't know what those who you're describing that way would have done if we hadn't had the wage subsidy. They may well not have kept their employees on. Our motivation here was to make sure that New Zealanders stayed in work, attached to their work, and gave businesses and their workers time to make plans. I'm still very proud of what the wage subsidy scheme did.
Can I just go back to your earlier answer? You said that you won't be implementing anything beyond what's on that sheet there. So even if you have coalition partners that are, say, the Greens, you won't be implementing any of their policies that are not on that sheet.
What we're saying is this is Labor's tax policy. This is what we're campaigning on. A Labor government will implement this tax policy.
Does your estimate of the yield of $550 million a year include any estimate of slippage into trusts or other avoidance?
Yeah, so no, I mean, in terms of trusts, what we're looking at there is no change, but the reason for that is because there are very legitimate reasons for trusts, and I'll let Mr Nash say a little bit more about this, but we have given IRD more resources to be able to crack down on those who cheat the tax system. And if we see any sign of that whatsoever, we will be cracking down on anyone who does that.
Stuart, just quickly answer, and you'll be aware of this, there was a very well-known tax case, Penny and Hooper versus IRD. That was where some very wealthy people tried to channel income through trusts. IR won that. We will continue to invest resources with Inland Revenue to ensure that people do comply with their obligations and don't try and avoid or evade their tax.
Richard.
In '99, Michael Cullen implemented that 39% at $60,000. Why are you not as bold as him?
This is a policy for the time that we are in now. We think it strikes the right balance. 98% of New Zealanders won't see any change. The top 2% will. We think that's the right balance to strike at this time.
What do you say to New Zealanders who are nervous that this is just the beginning of what Labor will be doing if it gets into coalition with the likes of the Greens?
What I can say is that this is Labor's tax policy, and we are committing to not implementing anything other than what is this if we're in government.
What do you say to those people who are nervous, though?
Well, they should vote for Labor, and that way they know that they'll get the policy that we're implementing.
You just back on Michael welfare and envy tax. What would your response be?
Sorry, I just missed the very beginning of that.
Your critics would call it a wealth or an envy tax, or maybe, taxpayers who might not vote for Labor.
This is a policy that strikes the right balance, I believe, between making sure that we keep debt under control, that we deliver on the vital public services that we need, and it is about everybody pitching in to make sure that we can recover and rebuild from COVID.
Is this Labor going after the rich pricks only?
No.
Just on the breakdown of the $500 million in revenue, can you provide us with some sort of outline about how much will be spent on health, how much education, and how much will be spent on paying back debt?
Yeah, so all of that will come out after PREFU. We've put out our policies, as you've known, with costs attached to them. Obviously, once PREFU comes out, you'll be able to see the balance between what happens with debt and how much ends up being spent.
So future Labor policies that you will be announcing on the campaign trail will be financed, if they're a health policy, through this tax?
In some ways, in some cases, yes. Obviously, if things are directly related to COVID-19, we have the COVID Response and Recovery Fund.
Did you consider a tax-free threshold? Did you consider a tax-free threshold?
I think for most New Zealanders now, they understand that in the middle of a recovery and rebuild from a 1 in 100 year economic shock, we've all got to pitch in. We are making a change here that means that for 98% of New Zealanders there will be no change. But right now what we all need to do is protect those vital public services, keep control of debt, and we all have to pitch in for that.
Are you saying the people who earn over 100? Does this mean also that you are ruling out tax cuts as well?
They're not part of our policy. Our policy is what's on the table here.
So no tax cuts?
Yes.
Labor isn't going to use...
So we'll just go to Luke because he didn't get that.
Are you saying that people who currently earn over 180 grand aren't pitching in?
No, what I'm saying is that we're just asking them to do a little bit more in this situation.
This seems like a pretty big structural change for $550 million that's going to go into a COVID health sort of a black hole over the next little while. What was part of the purpose of this explicitly trying to introduce more progressivity back into the tax system?
I don't agree with you about the way you've described it as a large structural change, and this person sitting immediately beside you definitely disagrees with that. This is a change to tax rates. It's a very easy to implement change. It doesn't affect 98% of the population, so I just don't agree with that analysis.
So on
we'll go to Janae.
Labor isn't going to use the tax system to address inequality that is likely to stem from asset price inflation. That is likely to be a consequence of the monetary policy that the Reserve Bank is implementing. Will Labor use the welfare system more aggressively to address that inequality?
We will be making announcements about welfare policy during the campaign, so I'll leave those announcements for them. We have already shown through this term in government our willingness to be able to continue to support both the lowest income New Zealanders, but also support working families as well, and we will keep doing that. Bernard.
On structural change, doesn't this just incentivise people to put more of their income through assets and make tax-free capital gains, effectively doing exactly what you campaigned against in the last election?
Well, again, for the time that we are in the response and recovery to COVID-19, we believe that this strikes the right balance. And I do, and I'm certainly happy for Stuart to say a bit more, we believe this strikes the right balance. It is important at this time in our history that we give New Zealanders certainty and confidence about their tax system. This is a change that will see 2% of New Zealanders pay a little bit more and 98% not. We believe that's the appropriate time.
But as you know, if someone is trading in assets, then they do have to pay tax on the income they make, the profits they make off that. And in that revenue will be given the resources to go really hard against people who are trying to hide their income or any form of wealth in assets when they are seen to be trading.
So just on that issue of capital gains and income tax, why aren't you more aggressively going for more income tax from international companies? Because this is the usual, wait for the OECD to do nothing and then do nothing.
Well, no, it's not. And the very point of the announcement today is to say that if we don't get that multilateral solution, we are prepared to step forward with a digital services tax. So that is actually a significant step for New Zealand. We've spent some time over this term consulting with the business community in particular about how that would work. So I actually do regard it as that. To preempt the question about how long will we wait, the OECD is making some progress in this regard, but this is a signal that in this term of government, if we get the right to do that, and we have not seen a multilateral agreement, then we would implement this digital services tax.
Taking the COVID contingency fund to one side, given the fact that you've announced this revenue policy, can you commit to any, and I know this might be complicated, so please walk me through it if it is, will you commit to have revenue neutral in all your announcements going forward?
So what we're committing to is showing New Zealanders how we'll pay for our announcements as we go forward. And so you'll be able to be clear where the money's coming from and how that affects the overall balance.
So is that a yes?
Well, yes, it is. Yeah. But I don't know if you and I mean the same thing by revenue neutral. You will be able to see how everything is paid for.
On the idea that this actually asks some New Zealanders to contribute a little bit more and help out the COVID recovery. Don Brash's tax policy was to have the 39% rate kick in at 100k, roughly 130k in today's money. That policy was more revenue generating than this one. So can you, is this really a Labour policy? Is this all that Labour's got when John Brash, the most Tory of Tories, proposed something that generated this more revenue?
Well, let's see how our opponents greet this policy today before we pigeonhole it in any particular way. What I would say is that this, New Zealand has a progressive tax system. This adds now a new rate into that progressive tax system. I believe it fulfills Labour's goals of providing a balance and some leadership and some certainty in a very uncertain time through COVID-19. So I think it's pretty difficult to pick out historic moments and compare them. We're in a 1 in 100 year economic shock. We have to strike the appropriate balance across all of our economic policies, including revenue, but also the economic development and the stimulus policies that we've got. I'm pretty confident that Don Brash won't be voting.
Why didn't you travel to Whakatane so that you could make this announcement alongside the Prime Minister?
It was always intended for us to make this announcement in Wellington. I'm the finance spokesperson for the Labour Party. This is the revenue spokesperson for the Labour Party, and I'm very confident that you'll be putting questions to Jacinda about it later.
In the middle of this crisis, what is the risk of going further? What would we hurt if you did the bracketed 150k?
Well, I mean, obviously, theoretically, you can put it anywhere. We think we've struck the right balance where 98% of New Zealanders have certainty that they will not be paying any more tax, and 2% of New Zealanders will be paying a little more. I think it really is important at the moment, as I go around talking to New Zealand businesses, to households, to people on the street, what I hear from them is, yeah, they are anxious about COVID-19. We've put forward a revenue policy that provides them with absolute certainty, and that for 98% of them, nothing's going to change. That is the appropriate thing to do at the moment.
Labour has been for a long time smashed around on tax. Were you too scared to set this policy? Were you too scared to set the threshold for that new tax bracket any lower?
I reject both parts of that question. This is a policy that builds on New Zealand's progressive tax system, provides certainty, provides some more revenue to make sure that we can protect those vital public services like health and education. I think this is a good policy. It's one I'm very happy to stand up here.
What's your message to young people who are possibly the ones who are most at risk of losing their jobs, or even vulnerable people who are at risk of losing their jobs at the moment, who aren't benefiting from their KiwiSavers growing, or their mortgage repayments being lower, and their house prices growing? What's your message to them?
Well, my message to them is that we have a $50 billion COVID response and recovery fund that's doing massive investment in job creation in New Zealand and supporting new industries to be created in New Zealand. This is a time, obviously, that's enormously tough for all generations of New Zealanders. But our policy in this broad space is about economic development. It's about job growth. It's about sustainable economic growth. And yes, it has a revenue element to it. But putting all our eggs in one basket for a particular generation isn't the way I look at it.
Why aren't you raising the trust rate?
Yeah, as I said before, trusts have a legitimate purpose in our society, and there are a number of, for example, children who've lost their parents and so on, who have their income generated through trusts. So we didn't think it was appropriate to change that. Also, we've got to bear in mind that the work that Stuart Nash and Inland Revenue have been doing means that they have the resources now, and they have the case law that backs them up now to be able to chase down anyone who exploits that. But what I want to make clear today is if we see any evidence of that, we will double down on that effort. Stu,
I completely agree. We talked about Penny and Hooper. That gave us the legislation. Talked about Penny and Hooper, which is a very well-known case within tax law, where wealthy people were trying to hide income in trusts. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, I believe. Inland Revenue won that case, and as Grant has highlighted, if we see mischief in this space, Inland Revenue will go very hard against those who are seeking to avoid or evade paying their pension.
How many cases have you prosecuted so far, though?
Well, no, what I would say is this is obviously, as the Minister has outlined, introducing a top tax rate. Previous to this, the trust rate and the top tax rate were the same. But as the Minister has also highlighted, 98% of Kiwis won't see any change in their tax obligations at all.
Minister, do you think a wealth tax or any sort of tax on capital is now possible in your political lifetime?
Oh, I'm not going to speculate about that, for there's a number of variables in that, including my political lifetime. What I would say is that this is the policy that we believe is the right policy for New Zealand as we recover and we rebuild. Just take some people who haven't had them. So yeah.
Grant, how much consideration went into increasing the lowest tax bracket as per the tax working group? And also, does ruling out any new taxes also include any moves that Labour would do on water bottling?
On water bottling. Yep, so this is our tax policy. What is here is what we do.
So if you were re-elected, you wouldn't touch water bottling?
That's not in our tax policy, and so you won't be seeing that here. In terms of the answer to your first part of your question, it is really important for us to have done something here that we think is about all New Zealanders pitching in, but is about providing that level of stability and certainty, and that works both ways. That's both in terms of what people pay in tax, but also for the government in terms of making sure we have the revenue we need to provide those essential services and continue the recovery and rebuild from COVID-19. And I want to reiterate the point, there are no costless decisions here, and so therefore all political parties need to be able to present a picture and a plan of how they'll keep a lid on debt and how they'll pay for vital services. That's what we're doing here.
Have you modelled any bracket creep over the next sort of 3, 4, 5 years?
Not particularly, no. Obviously, you'll be aware of those who are promoting that and what they believe that the impact that it has. But that wasn't something we were looking at.
I just mean in terms of this policy, 2%, it'll apply to 2% now and maybe 4 or 5% in a few years' time.
No, I mean the numbers are based on the traditional ways that we model it. So no.
So on that, did the party give any consideration to the idea of tackling bracket creep through indexing to inflation, given it would affect middle income?
I think it's worth bearing in mind that the shadow of COVID-19 has been over us since March, and so as the party has been developing its policy, that has been the lens through which we've had to view it. So, this is what we believe is appropriate for this time. We'll just take a couple more. Patrick,
we saw an example yesterday of Briscoe's announcing robust trading during the COVID period, same revenues, substantial dividend, and took the wage subsidy, which is being paid out in that dividend in effect. Is that appropriate? Why is that not mischief?
Well, as I said before in answer to Justin, the wage subsidy for us was about ensuring that New Zealanders stayed in work and had the confidence that they would have a job. It was also to give employers time and space to make their decisions. I have no ability to control or even be aware of what the counterfactual would be at Briscoe's. Would they have let their staff go? I don't know. So all I can do is put forward a policy that got money out the door quickly, gave New Zealanders confidence and kept New Zealanders in work. That was our goal.
What would your message be to an employer who has had those kind of conditions occur, whether they should keep the wage subsidy or not?
Well, that is entirely up to them. We set the rules and I'm not going to change those rules now. What I would say to that employer, as I would to any employer, is treat your staff well.
On setting the threshold, when you look at 150 grand, I think it's the top 3% of earners, so you're not really getting that many more people, but most Kiwis would probably look at an income of 150 grand and think that's a pretty good wicket. Why didn't you go there?
Well, again, it was simply about striking the balance between making sure that we've got a policy that begins to assist us with keeping debt under control, protecting those vital public services. And so we deemed 2%, 98% of New Zealanders don't, they have seen no change. And at the moment, in this environment, certainty and stability are so important to New Zealanders for their confidence. Yep, and we've chosen this because we believe it strikes the right balance.
You've campaigned for over a decade at some level taxing property wealth at some point, but obviously didn't work out this term. It's been rolled out for good. Have you philosophically given up on that debate? Have you been won over by people who say that actually it's not a good idea, or have you just politically given up on it? Have you just saying, look, I would rather do this, but it's impossible in the politics that we currently have?
I'm a realist and I'm a pragmatist, and we are in the middle of the 1 in 100 year shock to our economy. What is needed right now is certainty and stability. For 98% of New Zealanders, there is no change in this policy, and that's important to me. We will continue to work on the issues that New Zealanders care about that is reducing inequality, getting more houses built. We will do all of those things, but in terms of this particular policy, this is the parameter of
So if
it.
you saw a poll tomorrow that said that 80% of Kiwis supported a stringent capital gains tax,
Have you got one?
You would say it doesn't matter. I've been won over by the people who think that.
I look forward to reading your poll, Henry.
The Green Party is going to say that they're going to be continuing to push what they're saying is a fairer tax policy. If it comes to October, are you saying 100% if you're in coalition talks, tax policy will be something that's completely off the table?
What I'm saying is that this is the policy that Labour is campaigning on, and we will only implement the changes that are in this policy.
Do you think it's fair that people who own assets over the last 3 months, since the lockdowns, the value of those assets has risen $55 billion, and you've announced a policy that means it's not taxed at all, and the only increase in tax is $500 million?
I recognise that we live in a very volatile time, and yes, there have been some increases in asset values, but we also live in a time where we can, as all countries around the world have to do, is grapple with the uncertainty of this 1 in 100 year shock. I believe this is the right policy for this time. I think we've probably covered most of the ground. Luke,
do you see this in your mind, given that who knows what the world's going to look like in 3 years' time? Do you sort of see this in your mind as really a 3-year policy for the time being?
All policies are 3-year policies. It's the nature of our electoral system.
The Prime Minister...
Okay, thanks everyone.
Did you call our